Should I start now? We missed Mr. I will announce the two videos in the same time. We missed Mr. Bar. Is he here? Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel. Hello, everyone. Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'm Hakima El Haiti, President of Liberal International. For those who don't know, Liberal International is the World Federation of Liberals and Democrats. Our headquarters is in London. I have the pleasure and I'm very delighted to be your moderator for this session. Today we will talk about poverty, hunger, the transformation of the food and agriculture sector. And we have so outstanding speakers this morning. And we will tackle this theme from different perspectives. We will talk about water, about the war in Ukraine, about deforestation, desertification, food waste, biodiversity. So the theme is very large, but I think that our speakers, each one of them will focus on one area. And we will also talk about the future, smart agriculture, new technologies, digital transformation, ICT, robotic, new biology to support the agricultural sector. So today we will have, I will say, a diagnostic of the problems of food security in the world, but also we will try to know about innovation and technology and solutions for food security. Ladies and gentlemen, ending poverty and hunger is one of the greatest challenges of our times. Across the globe, 811 million people don't have enough food, and around 50 million are facing emergency levels of hunger. Although, and we will hear it, I'm sure, from this panel, there is enough food. Enough food is produced in the world to feed everyone on this planet. And this is said, I will ask our panelists if the goal, SDG 2, to end hunger by 2030, in this context where we are drinking from a toxic cocktail of war, climate change, the increase of threats on the peace and stability, the increase of threats on trade, this objective is still alive. Is the objective 2 is still alive within our times? So I will not be longer because we will have a very exciting discussion with our panelists today, but I will ask the organizers to show us the first speaker, and I'm delighted to announce Ambassador Sydney McCain, United States Permanent Representative to the UN Agency in Rome. She will address us through a video message. Please.
Hello. I'm Ambassador Cindy McCain from the U.S. Mission to the UN agencies in Rome. It's my pleasure to kick off the discussion today on poverty, hunger, and the urgent need to transform our food and agricultural systems. The world is facing the most serious food crisis in 70 years. It's like nothing I've ever seen. A perfect storm that's been building for years, fueled by COVID, climate change, and the ongoing conflict. Over the past few years, we've faced supply chain disruptions from the pandemic, severe droughts, floods, and heat waves from the Horn of Africa to South Asia, ruining harvests, killing livestock, and diminishing livelihoods. Conflicts have driven hunger and chaos from Yemen to Ethiopia and beyond. Our food systems were already vulnerable, and now Putin's senseless war has pushed us over the brink with soaring food prices, fertilizer shortages, and forced cuts to humanitarian rations. Almost 200 million people were in immediate danger because of food insecurity before the war in Ukraine. Now we're looking at 40 million more lives at risk just this year. We have to act now, and not just to address the immediate humanitarian needs. We must address the broader threats to our global food system and come up with long-term solutions that can stand the test of time and the shocks that are sure to come. It's time for the world to invest in resilience and innovation. It's time to promote climate-smart agriculture and cutting-edge water management. It's time to capitalize on private sector resources, expertise, and partnership. It's time to come together and invest in the future of our food.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to Minister Inam Karimov, Minister of Agriculture of the Republic of Azerbaijan, I will propose to you to look at a video he prepared for this panel.
Azerbaijan is a country where people live in harmony with a diversity of nature and culture. This diversity includes a geography ranging from subtropical gardens to fields, arable lands, and thousands of farms. There are also the high alpine pastures of the Caucasus Mountains. Every seed sown here grows within both tradition and modern practices. Working the land is an ancient tradition in Azerbaijan, which owns wealthy biodiversity and natural resources. We recognize that a sustainable food system lies at the core in delivering progress on all United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Azerbaijan has been one of the first countries to undertake mainstreaming and policy support mission for the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. By tailoring the goals nationally, we targeted to achieve sustainable, climate-friendly agriculture development within the tied diversification of economy. The government has focused on increasing productivity and ensuring food security for resilient livelihood. With the principle leaving no one behind, this ambition guided by the innovative solutions in digital transformation. Considering the driving force of digitalization and food system transformation, we do our best to contribute and integrate into this global challenge. If you are a farmer, agrarian supplier, or just a specialist in Azerbaijan, you will be a user of a single system that supports the agricultural chain. The Electronic Agricultural Information System includes modules covering all services from the first stage of agricultural production, such as land and seeds, to the final stage of product sale. Along with the state, the system provides cost and time savings, efficient communication for other participants of the agricultural chain as well. Big data, which is the integral part of the system, facilitates better forecasting and easy planning for sustainable development. Raising profile of agricultural education, research and development, including supporting independent innovation think tanks, remains its priority in government development policy. The Azerbaijan State Agriculture University, which combines education, research, and application functions, is the biggest higher education center on agrarian field in the Caucasus region. The university is equipped with modern technical equipment, that meets the requirements of innovative education and research, as well as high-tech laboratories that can study all the current issues of agriculture. The rural development and improved livelihoods of rural citizens also depends on building advanced high-tech climate-smart agri-food systems. The first Smart Village project of the Caucasus is being implemented in the East Zangezur economic region, and the relocation of population to this village is planned for the near future. Smart Village concept includes the application of modern urban planning standards, innovative approach to housing philosophy in 5 components, from housing, production, social services, smart agriculture, and the use of innovative building materials and alternative energy supply to e-governance centers. Policy that meets global agrarian challenges means agile adaptation to the Sustainable Development Goals. Agriculture in Azerbaijan is for a new culture of life.
Thank you. Minister, we saw on the video that Azerbaijan is very digital concerning agriculture and smart irrigation. Can you tell us more about your experience and tell us how your experience can be and can be used to support the food insecurity worldwide?
Thank you, Madam Minister. As it was shown in the video presentation, Azerbaijan is conducting a policy that covers all the spheres of responsible and inclusive agricultural development. And of course, Azerbaijan is not specifically, when we talk about agriculture, which is linked also to the environment, energy resources. We cannot talk in isolation and cannot act in isolation. We are the part of global ecosystem, Azerbaijani agricultural system, and that's why it requires us to act together globally in partnership with all the countries. As we know, and as it's stressfully and urgently indicated in international reports, specifically I would indicate FAO's last report on water and land resources, which gives an alarming signal that we're at the edge of breakdown or collapse in the use of water and land resources. The population, world population grows, and would like to indicate that one fact that last 20 years we have lost 3% of our land resources, even though the agricultural production has increased by 53% during the last 20 years. And for the coming 20 years, we have to produce 50% more to feed coming 10 billion population. And of course, taking into account other challenges like diseases, pandemics, and other unprogrammed, let's say, conflicts, this puts much more burden for us, and it requires us to act and to take urgent measures. Of course, one simple answer, but which covers many complex and interrelated measures, could be transformation in our actions, in our management, in our vision, in the way that we are managing our water and land resources. And digital transformation is one of these aspects that we think is one of the measures of the big complex measures. And Azerbaijan has taken important measures to implement digital agriculture. As we know, digital agriculture makes farmers' activity more productive, more efficient. It increases efficiency and productivity, and also profit of the farmers. It brings the notion, the picture of innovation to the agriculture, and it's also a mean to attract the young generation to the agriculture, by the way, which is a global problem in all the countries, because involving young generation to agriculture is a guarantee for the sustainability of agriculture in the future. So Azerbaijan, we can say that Azerbaijan has a model in this in building digital transformation. And by the way, I would like to mention that last month, with the organization of FIO, Azerbaijan, together with FIO, organized a conference which was called Digital Transformation and Role of Digital Transformation. And we shared very good results, were very good models, practices in this conference. And we are glad that we could be part of this process in promoting digital agriculture in other countries. I think what we should focus is also to build solid platforms. I think also this platform is also very important because without, as I said at the beginning, acting together, none of the countries in the world can not, in today's realities, develop its agriculture, responsible, inclusive, eco-friendly agriculture in isolation. It requires common measures. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much. I will ask you one question before giving the floor to our next speaker. Did you, you know that the world in general, if you take Africa, the consumption of water is 85% in average. In the world, it's 70% of water. Yes. What technology, like the one you have implemented in Azerbaijan, achieve as efficiency towards water economy?
In water economy, I think all of us would agree that the answer goes in applying latest new technologies which save water and which use water efficiently. And Azerbaijan is also one of the countries, obviously, where water takes a big part of the water consumption, around 70%. And we also have problems of water losses, which is not also water use, also, which is also a problem of land degradation. And for these purposes, government subsidizes the financing of modern irrigation system. If a farmer wants to apply a new irrigation system, we subsidize up to 40% of the cost of these new technologies, and the remaining 60%, out of 60%, farmers get credit without interest, but also farmers are exempt from all forms of taxes. But I think other measure that we should increase, even though we are conducting measures, to give messages, public awareness messages, and do explanation work. And public awareness is a key important measure. So, as I said, we share the same problem, and that's why we should act together, because water management and water problem, I think it's the same in all the countries. And what we see in Europe, in Western European countries today, is the fact that countries should work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I will now give the floor to our speaker, Amina. And before giving you the floor, Amina, I know that you are working a lot on Africa. And all we know that this war in Ukraine transcends the borders of Ukraine, transcends the borders of Europe, impact a lot food security in Africa through the disruption of the grain supply and also the fertilizer supply from Russia. And we know that from the 811 million people who are at the risk of food insecurity, 50% are based in Africa. I myself, as I told you, work on the Green Wall initiative together with the President of the African Union, and we know that this threat of food insecurity is not threatening Africans, but also has impact on migration, is threatening Europe, and has impact on human rights, because this is worsening with climate change, and we know that Africa is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. I know also that you are a specialist on biodiversity, so I would love you to talk about the link between biodiversity, disease, agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator, and of course, thank you to the Nizami Ganjavi International Center for providing this forum to touch on these very important issues. I'll just pick up from what the Minister has said for agriculture as practiced in Azerbaijan. It's interesting to see how digital technology have been rolled out in this country. But I think that there is a no-size-fits-all when it comes to agricultural practices in the world. I'll explain why. If you look at the African continent in numbers, we are talking about a continent that will reach 2 billion people by 2050, and it is home to 60% of the world arable land, but most of the agricultural practices in Africa is still rain-fed. And we are seeing that this continent, having generated less than 5% of greenhouse gas emission, is the continent which is going to be impacted more. So this poses a very big problem, is that so far, Africa has been a net importer of food. Over $35 billion is spent every year on production, on import of food. So where does this leave us in Africa when it comes to food production? And we saw over the past 2 years how food insecurity, and now of course compounded by war and other insecurities, have been the main concern of populations. Now, when we look at the African continent, we are faced with a scenario where over 70% of the food produced, they are produced by smallholder farmers. And now, what do we put at their disposal to make them even more productive? That's the first question. The next question is, we are seeing, and this is, of course, this morning's statistics, and I'll just quickly go on this. Over 55% of young people who have been interviewed this morning by the BBC, they have said that they are going to leave the continent, right? Now, how do we actually encourage them to stay and stay in the agricultural sector? Because there are opportunities, there are jobs. How do we retain these young people there? And when we've spoken about the issue of biodiversity, we have resorted to leaving the world's food security issues on about 20-odd species of plants, 20 families, which actually feed the world, and we have over 250,000 species in the world. So what has driven Africa, for example, and this is true for the rest of the global south, because this is where over 60% of the world population reside. How come we have resorted to such low numbers in addressing our food security, yet in Africa we have so many staples which can help resolve? I think of cassava, I think of sorghum, I think of millet, I think of fonio. All these grains, they are able to help addressing Africa's food security, but unfortunately have been displaced by barley, they have been displaced by the other grains that we know. And this posed the question of global distribution, because what's happening in Ukraine will have an impact in Africa, and yet Africa should have been able to be more food secure. So we need to look at the issue of biodiversity. Now, who talks about biodiversity automatically talks about climate change. And with a changing climate, we're finding drought, we're finding excess water impacting agriculture everywhere. So this brings us to many other issues, and you have mentioned also the issue of health, food insecurity. Looking at hidden hunger is a threat that many people don't talk about, because whenever we talk about food, we talk about quantity, we don't talk about quality. And we know that within Africa's biodiversity, there's enough in terms of resources, in terms of plant, that can help address hidden hunger. And here we talk about the neglected species, we talk about the underutilized crops, which can help produce. Now, but the main question is, how do we actually tackle the issue of agriculture? Not forgetting the gender component, because agriculture in Africa has a face. It has a woman face. Women feed the continent. But at the same time, these very women, they cannot have access to land, they cannot have access to capital, they are marginalized, they do not have the right technologies, because whenever we talk about technology, we tend to think about fancy technology, and yet with the appropriate technologies, existing technologies, being made accessible to farmers, they can make a big difference in terms of food production. So when we talk about agriculture, we are talking about a whole plethora of problems and also of potential, of challenges, but also of opportunities that we need to address in order to have the solution right there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Indeed, thank you so much, Excellence. Indeed, in Africa, 80% of the first tax in agriculture are women. So women are feeding Africa. And unfortunately, as you said, 70 to 75% of their production is lost because of they don't have access to finance, they don't have access to land. Only 1% of land in Africa is owned by women, and they don't have access to technology. So the storage is not insured, and they are losing their production before it arrives to the consumer. The FAO has released a figure which is 14% of the food is lost before reaching the consumer. This is globally, but believe me, in Africa it exceeds 50% of the food which is produced and not reach the market and the consumer because of technical problem and technical storage. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Now I think that I will give the floor to Alan Mustar, former US ambassador to Turkmenistan. Agriculture at Thank you so much. You have the floor.
Thank you. I have a confession, that is that numbers out to the second decimal. I tend to deal with round. In another panel, that 1% of the world's population possesses 46% of the wealth. And I want to give you the flip side of that, which is that approximately 50% of the world's population lives on $6 or less per day, and approximately 1/4 of the world's population lives on $4 or less per day. So when prices for food go up, and go up as sharply as they have this year, this is not just a financial burden on them, this threatens their food security and pushes some of them into hunger. And what's happened to prices this year? I went into the Agricultural Marketing Service website this morning to see what prices were yesterday. In central Illinois, corn at the average corn price at Illinois elevators yesterday was $7.90 per bushel. This is just a little bit under the record set in 2012 for the highest price of corn ever in history. Soybeans were $17.02 per bushel. Again, just about that much below the record set in 2012. And in Kansas City, at the Kansas City Board of Trade, wheat was selling for $11.05 per bushel. These are fantastic prices. And then when you get out to the export markets, you add on the freight charges, the cargo charges, it's even worse. So Ambassador McCain talked about a perfect storm, and I want to give you a sense of what that perfect storm looks like. And there are three components to it, really. The first is fertilizer. Russia is the single biggest producer of nitrogen fertilizers in the world. If you take Russian nitrogen off the market, then you have a real problem. And nitrogen fertilizers, by the way, are produced with natural gas. So you have a hydrocarbon that is producing the nitrogen fertilizers, which has implications down the road as we deal with climate change. Then there's the logistics. The agricultural trade tends to move through efficient channels, whatever is the cheapest way of transportation, which is typically on the water. Barges on the Mississippi River, moving across oceans, moving from the Black Sea out to other export destinations. So if you close the Black Sea, you disrupt that trade, you force the trade that does occur into unfamiliar, more expensive channels. And this means that there are higher costs. Then you have a stocks drawdown. This is the third year in a row that stocks have been drawn down for cereal grains around the world. And you might say, well, is there enough grain? And as we've already heard, yes, there is enough grain. The world produces and consumes about 3 billion tons of cereal grains per year. About half of that, again, a round number, about half of that is what we call feed grains, which is maize, sorghum, barley, grains like that. About 750 million tons is wheat, and about 500 million tons is rice. And this fluctuates from year to year just by a few percent. And you say, well, if it only fluctuates by a few percent, why are the price swings so prominent? And it's because of the volume that is traded. 25% of the wheat that is produced in the world goes into international trade. So if you disrupt those trade channels, prices go up pretty much across the board, and that's what we're seeing this year. That is the perfect storm. What does this mean as a policy imperative? It means that we need to provide income support to the poorest of the poor so that they don't go hungry. And that is the short-term solution. It's not a long-term solution, but this year, that's what's called for, is to get income support. I want to turn now to looking 20 to 30 years out into the future, because we have some things staring us in the face, not even over the horizon, they're on the horizon already, that if we don't start addressing them, we're going to see additional perfect storms. The first one is water. When I moved from Russia to Mexico in 2008, I encountered Mexican farmers with third-grade educations, barely literate, who were telling me, you know what, the rains are no longer as reliable as they used to be. We used to be able to count on the rains starting on a particular date in June. We would plant, the rains would come, and we would get a crop. He said, we can't do that anymore. They're no longer predictable. I moved to India 3 years later, and illiterate Indian farmers who couldn't read or write in any language told me the same thing. The monsoon is no longer predictable. It's no longer reliable. And this is the source of water in both of these regions of the world. You know about the drought in the American Southwest right now. You also know about the droughts in other parts of the world. water is an issue that we're going to have to deal with because of climate change. Water stress is rising, and if we look at who's producing these grains, the three most populous countries, China, India, and United States, are going to be facing enormous water stress over the next 20 years. And these three countries, incidentally, are the number 1, the number 2, and the number 4 producers of wheat in the world, number 3 being Russia, of course. China and India are the number 1 and number 2 producers of rice, and Bangladesh is number 3. Bangladesh doesn't have a water problem, except that it has too much water because of rising sea levels. This doesn't mean we're going to face imminent threats of hunger. It does mean, however, that water management is going to be an imperative over the next 20 years. And as I said before, agriculture is also dependent heavily on hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons underpin critical inputs such as fertilizer, such as motor fuels, such as diesel. Grain producers need natural gas and propane to dry grain so that it doesn't rot, so we don't have the kinds of losses that you're talking about. And pesticides are produced through organic chemistry that is based on hydrocarbons, and that is to protect your crops from weeds as well as from insect pests. So as the world shifts to renewable energy supplies, we have to bear in mind that agriculture is currently totally dependent on hydrocarbons, not just for motor fuels, but for the chemicals that make it productive. And we're going to have to think about how we deal with that. Are we going to continue to have hydrocarbon-based agriculture, or are there alternatives that modern science can give us? The last point I want to make, regarding fertilizer, I do want to add one point. There is a correlation between population growth and fertilizer use. As population rises, so does fertilizer use. The curves are parallel. So as we hit that 10 billion, we're going to be using more fertilizer, not less. The last point I want to leave you with is talking about land use. Land under crops, ironically, is actually growing. We have more land under crops now than we did 20 years ago, but it's coming at a cost. And if you look at the distribution, out of 224 countries in the FAO database, crop area increased in 103, just under half of those countries. But there's some disquieting things in those numbers. 4 of the largest increases in crop area are in Argentina, Brazil, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And we know at what expense that crop area has been expanded. It's taking rainforest out of production in 3 of them, and in Argentina, it's taking pasture out of production, putting it into crop area. So during that period from 2000 to 2019, cropland in those 4 countries grew by over 30 million hectares, while in the United States, it fell by 18 million hectares. In other words, we're seeing that in the developed world, cropland is falling, and we're making it up outside the developed world by taking out rainforest and other virgin lands. This is an environmental catastrophe that also is quite troubling. So there's a need for better land use planning if we're going to be good stewards of the land and pass it on to our children and grandchildren. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Alan. And indeed, we are living in a world which is so interconnected, and when the biggest producer of wheat and grain are in war, the impact is felt elsewhere in the world. So the crisis is generalized, and this is what is happening with the war in Ukraine. And I know that they are exporting, they are the first, Russia and Ukraine are the first exporters of grain and fertilizers in the world by 68%, correct me, but this is the information I got from the FAO report. And something else also, you talk about water, and the next challenges will not be any more food security and climate change, and you are right. It will be the war of water, because the latest report of the IPCC announced a drastic reduction of the amount of water and a huge drought worldwide. It's not only the most vulnerable countries like Africa. We are always, when we talk drought in the UNFCCC, we are always talking about Africa, but it's not true anymore. The latest report of the of the IPCC showed and demonstrate that that will be the issue worldwide, and in some region of the world, the production in agriculture will decrease by 40%. So the situation will worsen if we are not tackling climate change and organizing ourselves to deliver on climate change. Thank you so much. Thank you. I am now going, we missed Prime Minister Barak, and I was so excited to talk to him and to ask him about what is how they are dealing with agriculture in Israel. And I have had the chance to be there and to work there and to prepare my first PhD there. And I can tell you that they have experience which really need to be shared by the world. First, they are recycling and they are using 98% of their wastewater. They are building dams of wastewater and they are using 98%. They are implementing what we call Nexus Energy Water production, and this nexus, they are using smart, renewables to produce in agriculture. They are recycling the totality of the amount of waste, the drop networks, PAMPs, plastic drop networks. They are recycling plastic, they are recycling green, and I think that it's a pity that he was not sharing this experience together with us today, but I call on all of you to go and to see what is happening in this very small country, which is very green and very efficient in terms of dealing with sustainability within agriculture, water management, and climate change. Now I'm coming to you, Barbara, the last but not the least, and I know that you will tell us more about food security, and I'm very excited to know more about your institution because you are awarding $1 million for the people who are fighting against hunger. Thank you so much, and I call you to applaud her. Thank you for what you are doing, and I'm excited to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Greetings, everyone. Thank you all for your incredible patience as we finish 4 incredible days together. You're here at the final panel, at least the next to final panel, because the youth panel is coming this afternoon, and we can't miss that. But I feel honored to be here for the first time. Thank you so much to NGIC, and honestly, my first time in Azerbaijan. It's an amazing country, and amazing to be with all of you. I'm coming from the World Food Prize Foundation, and as new president of the foundation, and I'm coming with more of a message of optimism, given everything that we're hearing. Every single thing that all the panelists are saying about the challenges of food security at this time, global food security being possibly in the worst condition that we've seen in decades, is absolutely true. All of the statistics and in the various areas, these challenges face us globally. And there is so much incredible work going on around the world to address all of these challenges. And I have the beautiful job of trying to identify through my organization and recognize the individuals that are advancing global food security in the most substantial ways. So I'll just say a little bit about some of those areas. It's absolutely true that poverty and hunger are completely tied together. These figures that you hear about income and low incomes and poverty means hunger. Means the same 800 million people are malnourished, and that as we know now from the FAO report this year, 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. It's almost 1/2 of our population on the planet. The World Food Prize organizes every year with a tremendous selection committee, completely sequestered, hundreds of applications for individuals who are working to end hunger by 2030. Is the SDG 2 attainable by 2030? It has to be. And it takes all of the solutions that we're all discussing to address this, because there is no global food security if there's not food security. World Food Prize has been able to recognize 51 notable laureates in 15 different categories of achievement on all continents and from 25 different countries over the last 35 years. Dr. Norman Borlaug, father of the Green Revolution, founded the organization. MS Swaminathan was the very first laureate that received the World Food Prize in 1987. Since then, we have recognized scientists and researchers and humanitarians who have been working their entire lifetimes to improve the quality, quantity, and availability of food for all. And that's our mission. It's not just quantity, it's that quality and the availability and accessibility of food. These laureates are considered to be the Nobel Prize of Agriculture and the brain trust, the greatest brain trust of food security in the world. And in fact, in the last 2 years, they've spoken with one voice on critical issues, and really for the first time, they hadn't before. And this year, they addressed the triple threat of COVID, climate, and the conflicts going on in the Ukraine, but really worldwide. There's not just one conflict. As we heard earlier, there's 53 conflicts on the planet right now, and all of them have these same consequences in their localities. So this brain trust assembles every year in Des Moines, Iowa, of all things, to award the next laureate and to collectively discuss these global food security issues and what are the solutions. Our focus is on identifying those solutions and upscaling them. How do you take what's going on in country by country, continent by continent, and spread it? And this is our mission. So I'm just going to say a little bit about this year's laureate because it relates to climate change, and talk about some of the solutions that some of our laureates have identified. And I have the materials on our current laureate, and I have the letter that I just mentioned from 26 of our laureates trying to address this triple threat of COVID, climate, and conflict, and some of the solutions that are needed. I can say more about that. But specifically this year, we're so excited because our laureate is a woman, and out of 51 laureates, she's the 7th woman, only the 7th, and only the 3rd to win on her own. This is a woman who spent her career, 35 years, working for NASA as an agronomist and a climatologist. Very unusual. She identified 35 years ago that the climate models that were going to be developed and utilized around the world as we address climate change, those climate models needed to consider what was going to happen to our food. How was food production to be affected? So she brought together the climate models, economic models, and the agriculture models that were being used already around the world to predict what would be the changes across the globe in agriculture production, availability, and distribution. And these models have proven to be true in many parts of the world, and they're used now as resources by countries to create plans for how they're going to adapt and mitigate from climate change. So this is our most recent laureate. Coming up in October, she'll receive the award, Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig. So she brings part of the solution, and this is critical to focus on really what are the solutions that need to be upscaled. And this is the beauty of my job, as I get to focus on the careers of these individuals so that their work can be elevated and spread further. Other kinds of solutions that bring this optimism that I have is in climate smart agriculture. We have a laureate who has created drought-resistant varieties to sorghum and other crops and has spread them throughout Africa. So necessary, as we've heard already. Innovative water management solutions combined with drought-resistant rice. This was by a young researcher, 40 years old, under 40 years old, who won the Borlaug Field Award, another prize that we give, and coming to us from Ghana, and an amazing researcher. And soil-centric approaches that integrate less water, less fertilizer, less tillage, and increase production. And how do you do that? And this Dr. Ratan Lal has been spreading these technologies throughout South America. He's Indian. He studied in Africa with IITA and then mobilized all of his resources in South America. And this work continues. It must continue. So in your question, Sustainable Development Goals, and number 2, to be achieved, we have to achieve it, and it takes all of this. We cannot select whether we focus on a single country or a continent or a single technology. It takes everything.
Thank you. I feel so lucky to be seated nearby these ladies and gentlemen, because I had the privilege to be elected on an NGO which is called For Women in Africa, and we are dealing with these women to improve, to empower them in terms of technical way, to bring them materials and equipment they need, and to improve their revenues at the end of the month, because as Amina said, women are feeding Africa, and we are working there. I will not apply today to your award, but I will for sure do it for these women. Thank you so much for giving us this overview about your organization. I'm also involved in the Great Green Wall Initiative, which is an African initiative launched in 2007. This is 8,000 kilometers of forestation and agriculture in Africa. And it's creating a lot of opportunities for youth, a lot of hope for families, and creating jobs, sequestrating CO2 emissions, and also preventing waves of migration to Europe. And this initiative now is led by President Macky Sall, the President of the African Union, and I hope that you will join the initiative and we will support each other to make it happen and to make it successful. And last thing, before I give the floor to the audience, we have 15 minutes to discuss together. I want to say to our Ukrainian friends, and I saw some of them in the room, that we had a very tough discussion yesterday. But let me tell you that as Africans, we are supporting Ukraine. We are more than supporting, we are feeling it. And we are feeling the devastation the war is causing in Ukraine. And what we were saying yesterday is what we explained this morning in this panel. The impact of this war transcends Ukraine and reach Africa and the most vulnerable. And I'm asking you to understand what was said by Aishatu and myself yesterday night. And I will end by telling you that as President of Liberal International, the Bureau has decided some weeks ago to nominate the President of Ukraine for the Prize of Freedom. So, and it will be done on the 1st of July in Sofia in Bulgaria. So thank you so much, our very outstanding panelists. I will give the floor to the room and you will have the opportunity to answer to the questions. So I see 2 hands. Yes, please. and then Roman. My host.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to raise a question. My name is Lazar Comanescu. I'm a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania and currently Secretary General of the BISEC, the Organization for Economic Cooperation of the Black Sea. My question would be addressed to all the panelists. When I started my career as a diplomat, I was entrusted with being the desk officer for FAO. That was long ago in the 70s. And I remember that at that time, there was a world food crisis which was called the biggest, worst ever in the history of mankind. And as a result of this crisis, a World Food Conference was organized, and 2 new bodies have been created alongside FAO. I'm referring to the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I'm referring to the World Food Council, and 16th of October was established as a World Food Day. Now, more than 50 years later, I am very honest, and I see that more or less the same concerns are expressed about how to deal with eliminating food crisis in the world. My question to the panelists is the following. Since, as I said, we are talking about more or less about the same issues, isn't there a need of rethinking, perhaps radically, the way how the international cooperation in this area is being carried out?
Who wants to answer the question? Barbara? Can you repeat the question because the panelists didn't understand?
So my question is, since we are talking about the same problems with regards to the food crisis, as we were discussing, as the world was discussing 50 years ago, isn't there a kind of the conclusion that there is a need of rethinking, perhaps radically, the way how the international cooperation in the food and agriculture policies is going?
Thank you. Yeah. Barbara?
I believe this is going on already. We are in the midst of, for the most substantial time, I think, in the last 20, 30 years, addressing global food systems and transformation and trying to think about and approach it differently. It's built on the UN Food Systems Summit and UNGA's specialized day devoted last year, September 23rd, and the thousands and thousands of hours and pages of scientific research brought to bear for designing new coalitions, new forms of organization and structure, and new solutions to be disseminated worldwide. There is so much work to do, but these new structures, I think, hold great promise, because never before has there been the recognition that transformation of global food systems means transformation of every food system, and to take that task on. So I'm not saying that the UN Food Systems Summit will provide all solutions, but I believe this movement is started.
Thank you, Barbara. Amina, you want to add something?
Debates about, for example, the crisis in Ukraine, how it's impacting Africa. But there are some nice success stories on the continent. If I were to say that for the past 2 years, that Ethiopia has not been importing wheat, what has caused this transformation there? One of the factors that have caused this transformation is that the reform of agriculture are happening on the continent when the small farmers are being given the appropriate tools, the technologies. That's why I said up front that when we look at food security, be it in Africa, be it anywhere else, be it in the global south, because this is where over 70% of the population reside, and where there are food crisis issues, putting the technology in the hands of the farmers on site will make the difference. And we're not talking about advanced technology, we're talking about existing ones. So this is happening. And I think what we have to do is keep on empowering more the rural farmers, because this is where the root of the problem is. And this is where the flight of the young people are going away is happening. And what we also have to do when we talk about looking at this sector, I've said up front that women feed the continent. We're going to have to start changing the stereotype, removing the stereotype around agriculture as it's perceived by the youth. Because systematically, whenever we talk about, for example, I come back again to Africa because this is where I hail from, women are digging that dry soil with a baby on her back in the sun. And this is not agriculture in Africa anymore. So let us start by changing the narrative. Let us start empowering these women. Let us start giving the tools, and we will see the transformation in situ. And that's what we would have to do. It's happening, but it is not getting the traction. But I'm sure it is going to happen because increasingly agriculture on the continent of Africa is being posited as being a $1 trillion business. And that's heavy for any region.
I will say that 15 years ago, we didn't have the technology. We didn't have the solar energy, the pumping solar energy. We didn't have the drop-to-drop irrigation was not very developed, not very optimistic. But the robotic was not developed. The digital and smart irrigation was not known. Smart agriculture was not known enough. I think that now we have the right technology. I think we need to have the will to implement the global transformation because we don't have any choice and we don't have choice anymore. If we are not transforming agriculture to secure food, the food, I think climate change will destroy everything. So we are under the global transformation, and irrigation and agriculture is inside this global transformation. Roman, then Mr. Ismail.
Thank you. I wish to acknowledge fully the issues raised by Alan Mustard in his presentation about the water stress. Today, the integrated management of water in order to use it more efficiently and to conserve water is crucial. I'm myself a hydrologist and I'm an environmental physicist and still working in these fields. It's not that we are hit by droughts because there is less water. No, we have more water in the atmosphere due to melting ice of the Arctic glaciers. But the climate change has changed the distribution. The hot spots are hotter, and the places where floods come are coming with the floods more disastrous. Last year in Germany was an example. This integrated management today is using a variety of beautiful technologies, like dropping. We use water drop by drop, like improving the sublayer of land in order to keep the humidity longer. We cover every pound of water with water panels in order to reduce evapotranspiration. That electricity used for the dropping technologies. Desalination plants. All this is pointing to our capacity to improve conservation of water and improving the management of water. So my question is very simple. Don't you think it's time to transform Food and Agriculture Organization into Water, Food and Agriculture Organization? Because water is today something we can manage globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Roman. I will give the floor to Mr. President Ismail and then come back to you. We'll listen to all the questions, then we'll give the floor to the panelists.
Hello? I just wanted to observe really and build on what Prime Minister Petr Roman just said also about water and about transformations that are taking place right now. It's important to remind ourselves that if you look back in the last century, people believed that famine was endemic in China. In fact, I have seen reports that say you can't send food assistance to China. They always have famines anyway, it's an annual event. To people like Paul Ehrlich, the great environmentalist, writing that 1975 would be a famine year in India because India couldn't feed its hundreds of millions and certainly couldn't feed 460 million people, and therefore the US food program should stop trying to help India. But guess what? I mean, India that couldn't feed 460 million people has a surplus with 1.2 billion people, has become a major producer and exporter, is becoming a major exporter as well of some grains. China has manifestly balanced itself quite well at the 10% margin that is there. So in early technologies which relied, like the Green Revolution, on fertilizer and the special varieties like dwarf wheats and so on, have now been overtaken by other technologies, and that we are in the midst of that transformation. But there has been, I mean, contrary to what that gentleman said there, it's not the same discussion at all in terms of famine in the world and so on. We talk a lot more about Africa because so much better has been done in Asia than was the case in the previous 60 years or so. Now, at present, yes, water is becoming extremely important, and I will leave you with just one strange observation that most people don't know. If you ask somebody, how much water do you need as a human being? We can't live without water. They'll think of saying, well, maybe 2 liters, maybe 3 liters. So, okay, and to cook, maybe another 10 liters. To bathe, maybe I'll give you another 15 liters. Shower, whatever you want. Oh, maybe also for what my share of what industry takes and to clean the streets and so on, maybe 140, 145 liters. Well, guess what? You actually consume 2,700 liters a day, every one of us, based in the food. It's approximately, I did these calculations with Peter Glick before, it's approximately 1 liter per calorie. The lowest being the Sahelian herders, about 980 liters for their 2,000 calories. The highest being the United States because they have beef content and so on, which is about 5,500 liters for close to 3,000 calories. On average, it turns out to be 1 liter per calorie. So imagine every one of us is actually consuming 2,700 liters of water per day through the food we eat. And this shows up indeed the enormous link that we have. Now we're observing new transformations between the hydrological cycle and the ecological cycle and climate change. And one of the things that we should try to do, I believe certainly, that the food and agricultural sector, which currently contributes about 15% of climate emissions, can be a major, you can flip it around with the new technologies, and it will be a major absorber of CO2 emissions, maybe up to 20%. So we are in the midst of a transformative moment, and in no way are we similar to where we were in the past, and I'm very, very supportive of the work that the scientists are doing in these areas.
Thank you, Professor Ismail. Thank you, Your Excellency. Yes, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Edmund Panariti. I'm coming from Albania, been Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Agriculture, which counts the most here in this panel. I will start with what the FAO ambassador of the United States declared about the resilience agriculture. Well, first, I would like to ask you, what do you exactly mean by resilience agriculture? In terms of economic model, in terms of inputs, I mean seeds and things of that kind, because it's a very complex thing, but we need to discuss a little bit. When we talk about resilience agriculture, we tend to think about small-scale agriculture, small-scale agriculture, not large scales, because dinosaurs cannot survive major cataclysms, but lizards, they can survive. So in terms of general turmoils, wars, and general crisis, climate crisis, now we need to rethink it all. So I would like to ask you, what do you think about, should we switch slowly and firmly from large-scale production to small-scale production, or we should strive to select something in between? Because this is something which needs to be seriously considered when we talk about resilience agriculture. And then another question would be, are we prepared to use GMOs? Because this is something which we need to consider. If we want to distribute resistant seeds from drought, and I mean we need plants who can consume less water, we need to prepare ourselves to launch these seeds which can provide this characteristic and enhance agricultural production. So what would be your answer to my question?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Lady, and this is the latest question because we are running out of time. Yes, please.
Thank you. Rosalía Arteaga from Ecuador. I had the opportunity during some years to lead the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization that was taking care of the biggest basin of the world. 8 countries share that basin. And it's responsible for the 20% of the reserves of sweet water of the world. But the big issue is how to deal with agricultural issues. More than mining, more than others that sometimes appears on newspapers, the agricultural and cattle rights are the most, affecting the most on the basin. Then we must think very deep in how to modify the habits of the agricultural sector, and also how to modify our habits, because we have to think more what we are eating. Is it from the surroundings of our home? Is it from abroad? What's the cost? And in the cost, we have to put very often the amount of water that we are using to produce that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now I will give the floor to our speakers, and maybe I will begin by our Minister of Azerbaijan. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start firstly with the comment on food crisis that was asked, that what's the response, should we modify our policies? I think, first of all, we should think about and tackle the causes of food crisis that we faced in the 70s and we may face in the coming years. If the cause was in the 70s, I think the problem of mostly distribution, fair distribution and accessibility of the food. But today we're faced more with other type of problem, which is possible production of the food, which puts under stress the water and land resources. And that's why I think the problems and the causes are a little bit different, and that's if the institutions were built up to tackle the problem, which was caused mostly by distribution and accessibility. Today, I think we should reformulate and rethink about the models. It's obvious because the problems are different. And as to the concern of water resources, we should stress, of course, on the water, but it should go in parallel with land and water, because these are both very linked. And I wouldn't say which one is more important, water or land, but I think both of them are linked together. These are Siam twins, and that we cannot separate. So then the list would be longer. I think under the current mandate, international organizations have all the mandates both on land and water. Maybe we should focus more on these topics. As to the question asked by my Albanian colleague on the scale, large scale or small scale farmers, each country has its realities, and concerning the scale of the lands, in some countries you have very small scale lands, in some countries you have larger scale lands. Azerbaijan specifically is agricultural system is based on small scale lands, and we cannot, it's very, we have to act based on these realities, and I think we should take benefit all of the system. Small scale has some benefits, a large scale and middle scale, and we have to take, not to make the choices, which one, but act and take and benefiting from the realities, act on the realities. And as to the GMOs, you would agree that GMO is not only in some countries, also in Azerbaijan and in most of the European countries. It's not only agricultural issue, it's also public opinion, how we should work with the public opinion, and sometimes it needs large, it doesn't take only decisions, we take a decision, government take decisions. It also requires large public discussions and public opinion. Is the public ready for this? Even though from economic and agricultural point of view, it can be decided, but I think it needs a larger consensus still in some countries, also in Azerbaijan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alan?
Regarding the question of small scale versus large scale as a factor in resilience, I think you're going to run into two factors that are going to determine that country by country. One is the margins in agriculture. If the margins are slim in terms of profitability, you're going to see an increase in scale, simply because a small farm can't support a family. And that's why in the United States, your average farm is now well over 1,000 hectares, simply because small farms cannot survive economically. That's another reason that most farmers, if you look at the roughly 2 million farmers there are in the United States, the vast majority of them, farming is their second income. Their first income is off farm. So the other is labor. Small-scale agriculture requires more labor, and in economies where labor is expensive, you simply will not be able to attract the labor. You'll have to go to automation, and that implies an investment that requires larger scale. On biotechnology, I was agricultural counselor at the American Embassy in Vienna when the European Union effectively banned GMOs in between December of 1997 and December of 1996, and June of 1997. And it was done for purely political reasons, under pressure from two NGOs in Europe, Greenpeace and Global 2000. It's now 2022. It's been a quarter of a century, and we know this technology. We know it's safe. We know that biotechnology is a force multiplier in both plant resilience to external factors and in terms of productivity. So yes, we need biotechnology, we need GMOs, and the nonsense should really stop. And a comment on water. You did not mention the loss of glaciation due to climate change, which is a factor that's really going to start hitting us in about another 20 years. In some parts of the world even sooner than that. But if you look in the area of the world just a little bit east of here, Central Asia is largely dependent on two rivers, the Sur Darya, the Amu Darya, which are fed by the Tian Shan, by glaciers. The Asian Development Bank did a wonderful set of reports on climate risk, which I recommend that you read. And they say that starting around 2050, the glaciation will have been reduced to the point that the water flow will drop. And at that point, if there's not something done about it, agriculture will simply curl up and die in Central Asia. And that will trigger a migration problem affecting something on the order of 50 million people. So it's an issue.
Sarah?
Thank you. Well, wonderful issues brought forward on the small scale versus large scale question. I think we're going to continue to see investment in smallholder farmers and small scale upscaling, and that has to continue country by country. But you're going to see in big agriculture diversification. Regenerative ag and sustainable agriculture is the future direction for major producers around the world. They recognize it. You can see it on every website. You can see the sustainability production reports across the board. This has to continue as well. So you'll see, I think you'll see both resilience and sustainability. I just want to not leave today without talking about food waste. The number one thing that we can do, 14%, you already said, FAO says we're losing 14%. It's 30% in certain developed nations and continents, entire continents. 30% of food lost or wasted, with the implications of what it takes to produce it in terms of inputs and fertilizer and energy and water, as Ismail so well described. So food waste is a number one thing we can do for water conservation, climate change, and every kind of resilience. And I just want to say that there's tremendous innovation and research going on how to reduce food loss in harvest, in storage, to reduce it with scaling of refrigeration, transportation, where we lose so much. And of course, in the West, in the consumer end with restaurants, commercial retail, the food waste at that level is truly horrifying. And you see there's innovations in every country and research going on. Wageningen University and research has a tremendous program where the country has already committed to 50% reduction of their overall food waste by 2030. And even greater by 2050. So again, the solutions are there. That's the place to focus for most immediate answers, particularly in the developed world. And identifying, adapting, and scaling these solutions is what's crucial.
Thank you, Barbara. Your Excellency, Amina.
Thank you. I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll just quickly summarize. There's a couple of things that we haven't touched on, which are, I think, critical when we come to addressing agriculture, is traditional knowledge. And traditional knowledge are essentially held by women who are custodian. And I think if we use traditional practice in addressing, for example, agriculture in the Sahelian region, for example, go back to the way that people used to grow, dig these holes to save the water, especially as we're looking at changing water cycle. And so this will help, of course, addressing the green wall that you have talked about. When we look at seeds, how countries should be seed sovereign and also save the original seeds. I mean, this is critical when we look at food security in a changing climate as well. We need the original seeds. So I would encourage many countries to actually grow, but produce their seeds, keep them in seed banks, I know this is, of course, contrarian to many thinking right now, but I'm convinced that we need to keep on saving these seeds. And also to address the issue that Ismail has said, and also the water issue, hidden water, invisible water. I think I will cite Ali Marzuri, an African philosopher, who said, to address the change that we are talking about, we produce what we do not eat, and we eat what we do not produce. So I think if we start addressing this, we will talk about proximity, we'll talk about the changing habit that Rosalia has rightly mentioned, and we should be able to go towards a more secure world. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you so much for our panelists. I cannot end this panel without sharing with you what I did when I was Minister of Environment of Morocco. I first began by putting a law on sustainability. So all the policies were obliged when the law was adopted to integrate in sustainability within the policies of the state, or in all the policies and all the programs of the state, including agriculture. And what we did in agriculture, and here I will answer to your question, what we did, we made an integrate, we have a green plan, but the green plan didn't think about green waste, didn't think about the network and the pipelines, the drop-to-drop pipelines lines, and we were producing more than 8,000 kilometers a year, because each year or 3 years, depending on the culture, you have to change the pipes. So what we did, we create a new factory to recycle all the plastics of the networks of agriculture. So we create new business. We create a new factory to make methane and biogas from the green waste in agriculture. We stop subsidizing fossil fuel and we give this money to the agricultural people who were willing to integrate smart agriculture. We implement 1 million pumping solar wells in Morocco, 1 million pumping solar plants. Now, is it good to do it on a small scale or large scale? I had this experience with our Minister of Environment, Agriculture, and I can tell you it's more easy to make it in a large scale, and it's more productive, and the scale of the return time for investments is shorter. It's more easy, and when you have a big exploitation, generally you have engineers, and it's more easy to work together with them. And 95% of our exploitation are small farmers. So we had to make them in cooperatives and to work together with them, to empower them, etc. So more complicated. It's why it's very difficult. The technology is there, the knowledge is there, but we have to work together to implement this technology. And the last question, when you talk about we need as a consumer to think about what we eat, and you are right, madam. We need to think about it because in Morocco, for example, we have a huge shortage of water. You know that irrigation in Morocco was consuming 85%. We now are about 65%. We did a huge effort in water economy. But the problem is that we are still planting watermelon. I'm looking at the page because I didn't know in English. Watermelon, we are still planting tomatoes and exporting oranges, etc. And this is 100% water. We are exporting water abroad. But the problem is that you cannot say to the agriculture what he has to plant. This is very socially, in a social dimension, it's very difficult to oblige them not to plant what they want to plant. So, thank you so much for being patient together with us. I hope that when we will be in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, Mr. Prime Minister, we will talk about the 100 billion which is the due of the Eastern world to deliver on COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and this is the way to support all the vulnerable countries to adapt themselves, to switch to smart agriculture, and to fight against food insecurity. Thank you so much.